the best business advice I'd ever received was, are you ready for it? Play in the horror's energy. But before we go too deep into that, my name is Sharita Bagby, former conformist turned profit rebel, working with high achieving men, focusing on purpose, passion, and profit. And today we are going to talk about playing in the horror's energy. And I've been wanting to talk about this for probably about 2 years now. And today we're just gonna do it. We're gonna do a little freestyle, free flow. I don't have any notes in front of me. And when I thought about doing this, I'm like, how much do I want to share? But we're gonna just get real. We're gonna get raw. We're gonna get vulnerable. We're gonna grab a fresh glass of Chardonnay. Let's take a little sippy sippy because we gotta set the mood for this one. Okay. Okay. So you've probably heard me mention this before. Uh, Hold on. This is a big story. During the pandemic, I was kind of at that place of like burning it all down. I was coaching. I'd been coaching for years and years and years. I'm finally making the money that I want to make. I've got steady clientele. It's easy peasy. But I was so bored. I was bored as fuck. And if you, anybody who's maybe watching this on Facebook, if you've been on my friends list for a while, you know that I actually spent probably 6, 8 months, like just talking about, I think I'm going to quit coaching. I'm so over coaching. I'm bored with coaching. Like, I'm so bored. I'm so bored. I'm so bored. I'm so bored. Pandemic hits. We go on lockdown. It was what it was. It was lockdown. But come January of 2021, I booked a trip to the Bahamas. And it was supposed to be a 2 month solo trip. My husband was actually coming out for a couple days to hang out, but I was going to go out for like, I don't know, think it was like 10 or 11 days. And then he was going to come out for about a week or so, a week and a half. And then he was going back, and I was supposed to be there the rest of the time by myself. And he came out, I'm like 10, 12 days into this trip, and I sit him down and I'm like, this very basic house that I rented in Eleuthera. But I mean, you talk about beachfront, like it was amazing, right? I could throw a stone and hit the sand. And so I'm like, I'm living my dream. I'm like, I want to be living on an island. I want to be living on a beach. And so when he was out there, I was like, babe, I want to stay longer. And he kind of gave me a little back and forth. And I was like, I don't know if you know anything about me in real life, right? Not on the internet. But if you know anything about me personally, you know that I always get what I want. Like one way, shape, form, or another, I always get what I want. And so finally he relented, and so right then and there I'm on Airbnb and I'm messaging the owner like, "Hey, the house looks available. Can I stay another 2 months?" And she was like, "Sure, no problem." And she blocked it off for me. So it's set. Now I'm going to be staying for 4 months. So let's see. I went out in late January, February, March, April, May. So May, okay. He came back out in May and came with some family members, and we were all staying. We were having a lot of fun. And I sit him down again and I'm like, loving life. I want to stay longer. We had a little bit of go back and like a little back and forth, and we agreed on another 4 months. Now I stuck with 4 months. I said that because I knew that in the Bahamas I could be there 8 months without a visa as an American. Was it nationalist? Is that the term we use? Is that the technical term? As an American, we'll just say that I could be in the Bahamas for 8 months without a visa. And so around mid late June, I actually ended up hiring a personal coach because at this point I'm just floundering. I had a few clients who came out and we did some beachfront coaching, which, side note, which is why a lot of my business is built the way that it is, but we'll come back to that in a minute. But I was still kind of debating, like, coaching is what I love, but I'm annoyed. I'm bored with it. Like, I was tired of having the same conversations, if that makes sense. And so I started working with a coach, and she asked me one day, she was like, Sharita, why don't you work with men? And this is where it starts to get a little bit raw and vulnerable. So you're just gonna have to bear with me. So I'm gonna try and keep this as succinct as possible. And I'm just gonna say no judgment, okay? Just no judgment. All right. And so she asked me, why don't you work with men? And I was like, And she said it in a way like this. She was like, "You work with women." I'm like, "Yeah." And she was like, "Why don't you work with men?" I was like, I don't know if it's a fit." And she was like, "You know that your content isn't really landing with women." And I was like, "Well, and in my mind, I'm like, I'm making money. What are you talking about?" And so I sat and thought about it, and I was like, "Well, it is what it is." And I was like, "No, yeah, yeah, you're right. You're right." Like, of course, there are always going to be people when you have something out there and you are operating within your own energy. People are going to want what you have or what you're offering if you put it out there, right? If you build it, they will come. And I was working with some really cool women, right? But again, I was bored with having the same conversations. And so she was like, "Be honest. Why don't you want to work with men?" So I had to be honest. And I was like, "Truth?" She was like, "Well, obviously." And I was like, "Because I'm afraid I'll fuck them." And I was like, "I'm married. I don't want to dishonor my marriage. I don't want to create a scandal. Like, this is my professional space. It's safe and easy to work with women. I am a woman. I get women. Like, it just makes sense." And she was like, "Okay." So long story short, we really delved into the conversation of not wanting to work with men. And one of the things that she started asking me was like, about things that I desired, not just within my business, or as I like to say, within the boardroom, but also within the bedroom. And so I kept it real with her and I was telling her, these are the things I want. She was like, "Well, you're married. Why don't you do those things?" And I'm like, "I can't do that." And she was like, "What do you mean?" And I'm like, "I grew up in a very deeply Christian household. Like, church 8 out of 7 days a week, speaking in tongues, Pentecostal, like the whole 9 yards, right?" And I was like, "There's no way." I was like, "And I don't even like to initiate sex with my husband." And she was like, "What is that about?" And so as we started talking about it, I was like, I was always taught that, like, growing up, and it made sense growing up, like, no shade to my mom and to my upbringing. I had a wonderful upbringing, right? And I'm glad my mom taught me what she taught me. But one of the things my mother taught me was like, she used to say this all the time: little girls don't call little boys. If he's interested, he will call you. And so there was this space where I became very passive when it came to my sexuality, right? And that carried into my marriage, where, like, if he didn't initiate it, even if I wanted it, I didn't say anything or I didn't do anything about it, because to me in that moment it felt slutty, it felt dirty, it felt like this is not what women do. Growing up, I always heard that term, like, ladies of the night and women of ill repute. Like, initiating sex is what women of ill repute do, and I am not a whore. And so it was wild, because one of the things she said to me was, she goes, "All of that belief, it's couched in guilt and shame around sex." And I was like, "Well, no, yep, that's absolutely right." And I was like, "It's wild, because when those things do come out, they come out in a very, like, alcohol fueled, explosive way, like, at home, okay, at home with my husband." And so she was like, "Yeah, because you're carrying a lot of guilt and shame around sex." And I was like, "I really fucking am." And so one of the things she was like, "Okay, here's the deal." And we started talking about what it would look like if I were to work with men, and what type of work do I want to do with men, and how I see myself in the position of coaching and working with men, and the type of men that I want to work with, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so one of the things that I recognized is, like, right off cuff, I was like, I see myself as an oasis, like a safe harbor. I see me clearing, like, almost like a lighthouse standing on the peak, cutting through the fog, guiding them in. And so she was like, "Okay, okay, keep going with that." The more and more we talked about it, we talked about this space of, I said, from a intuitive knowing, because again, if you know anything about me, I've got one foot firmly planted in strategy and logic and being deeply analytical. Like, for anybody who's into astrology, like, I am a Virgo, Scorpio, right? But then I've got that very abstract, very conceptual side. Like, you're talking to the woman who did oracle readings for years and years and years, very intuitive. So there's a balance between my analytical side and my intuitive side that I was really trying to strike, well, let me put it like this. I was trying to strike a balance with the two because it usually went to extremes, like all or nothing on in any direction at any given time. And so we were talking about what that looked like. And I said, I know where my zone of genius is. My zone of genius is really in recognizing where people are holding blocks. You know, sometimes it's easier said than done with others than it is with self. But what she really did was she forced me to go within and to find that understanding and those blocks within my own self. And so she started talking about there's a space that you can hold with these particular types of men, and without being in that deeply sexual space. You can be sensual without being sexual. You can tap into your femininity without losing your analytical side. Like there's a balance to it, right? Two things can be true at once, as they say. And so in doing so, she was like, all right, Shrita, I've got some homework for you. I was like, okay. She was like, I want you to go play in the whore's energy. And I'm looking at her like, I'm sorry, what? You want me to go do what? And she was like, go play in the whore's energy. And she was like, it's not to go, I'm not telling you to go be a whore. What I'm telling you to do is to play in the energy, in the freedom of your sexuality. Like, think about it from a whore's perspective. Like, if you're an unapologetic whore, you're not worried about looking slutty because you've embraced that slut energy, right? Like, so what would that look like? And so my analytical side went really in, and I started journaling and writing, and what does this look like for me? And what was interesting was, believe it or not, she and I were meeting once a week, but believe it or not, it took me about 2 years to play within that energy to really find my balance. Remembering balance doesn't always mean equal. And so in that space of the whore's energy, I kind of moved from one extreme to the other because as a woman, one of the reasons, and I'm going to bring this full circle, that I was getting bored with my conversations and coaching with other women is because the types of women I was attracting at that time, they appreciated my message. They loved the work that we did, but they were looking for someone to hold their hand and guide them. And that wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do. I didn't want to hold your hand and try and convince you or help you to convince yourself that you're worthy, right? Sorry, I've got another monitor over here that's flashing at me. I didn't want to have to convince people that they were worthy or to convince these women. I have a very strong personality. Some it may even be overbearing, but if I'm not careful, I will bowl you over, right? And so what I found, I was struggling with those conversations, even though my clients were getting great results. I was bored because I was having to tame myself. And now I'm moving in the wild, untamed. And on one extreme, it started to feel almost, I allowed myself, as I'm playing in this energy, on the first extreme, I moved into this like sensual, seductive, predatory nature, right? Like, as opposed to keeping myself right here, like, it's not that I changed my clothes. It's not even necessarily that I changed my speech or how I am standing. Before I used to stand like this, now I stand like that. Like, that wasn't the case. I've always been this woman. But it was more so just in my aura, in my energy, in my presentation. I moved into this very seductive space, and it almost felt predatory in a very sensual, sexual way. Like, I guess the only word I could really think of it is it felt like cougarish, right? And no offense to cougars, like we don't shame anything over here, okay? We don't kink shame, we don't none of that. Like, if you're into younger, do you, honey, do you. But it felt very predatory almost. And I don't, for me, I'm comfortable using the word predatory, but I hesitate to use it in public because in the world that we live in, if someone is a sexual predator, like, that's a very negative thing. Like, this wasn't predatory, like I'm preying on someone's weaknesses. per se, in a non-consensual type of situation, but just in my conversations, like there was a lot of innuendo and a lot of just there's an aura you get from someone when someone's being straight up and direct versus when someone's flirting with you. They can use the same exact words, but there's an aura that you pick up on, right? I'm just gonna trust that you understand what I'm saying. Okay, I'm not gonna try and over explain myself or justify myself. Now, flip side of the coin. So this goes on while I'm in the Bahamas, and I start to notice the type of reactions that I'm getting from both men and women. Women were wholly and completely turned off by me. Like, bitch. Men on the other hand are starting to have conversations with me that I'm like, ew, gross, but I also recognize you open this door, Sharita, right? So over time, what happens is I start to reel it in and I take it back the other direction. And am playing again in the freedom of this whore's energy, but I start to move through logic with it. And I actually did end up having a couple other launches that I did with women. I don't know if some of you remember the Huntress and the Courtesan. Those were two, I wonder if I can find some of that content. Those were two launches that I ended up, I'll throw them in the video so you can see what I did. But I did those with women, and it wasn't about taking advantage of men when I talk about being a huntress or being the courtesan. It was that very logical, analytical side of bringing the fullness of self, including that sexual energy, that deeply feminine, wild, and untamed side into your professional space within reason. Okay, within reason. And I started noticing again how women started to react and how men started to react. And when I was in that very analytical phase, again, being a fairly dominant woman, it was a space where I was starting to encounter a lot of submissive men. And then I was in terms of women, I was encountering a lot of women who maybe weren't so dominant, but wanted to be dominant. And that still wasn't the conversations that I wanted to be having. And so, as I'm working on this is when I'm really starting to launch Alpha Male Principle. And I've had a few iterations of Alpha Male Principle because I went from Principal, like PAL, because I was thinking from one perspective to now it's Principle, which is like the principle of purposeless passion equals profit, right? Okay, we'll come back to that at another time. But what was interesting within that was I really had to ask myself, like, what is it that I genuinely want? I had the framework, I had the outline. I knew that I wanted to be the safe haven, to be the harbor, to be the lighthouse on the beach, like clearing the path, clearing the clouds, calling him in, letting him be safe within my space. But like, what does that look like? Now that it's not clouded in guilt and shame around my sexual being, my sexual energy, I was able to begin to learn how to incorporate that and balance it with my analytical side without being overtly sexual and without trying to like rationalize and overthink the whole process. Because, side note, recovering overthinker here, right? So it became this delicious balance where I had to get real with myself. What do I want that I'm not allowing myself to want? And then once I acknowledged what that want was, when I first started to play with that whore's energy, I was playing with that surface level want. Because let's just keep it a buck. Let's keep it 100% real. There is something very delicious and lovely to being desired, right? But there is also something, especially as a married woman, that could be very dangerous about that. Well, even as a single woman or man for that matter, or they, them. I don't use male and female to discount anybody's experience. So bear with me on that. But there can be a dangerous space to being desired, because the last thing you want to do is like trap yourself in a situation that you can't get out of, that can turn very physically dangerous or even mentally or emotionally dangerous as well. So I really had to like find that balance within that. But in being honest with myself, I had to recognize it wasn't so much the space of being desired physically, sexually, for my mental well-being, as much as it was the space of me allowing myself to step deeper into my femininity, because I operated with a very masculine mindset of like keeping it very structured, right? And as I came out of that, I was able to be more free flowing. And it actually ended up doing a lot of beautiful things for my marriage, because you can't tell somebody to wear the pants while you got leg in, the pants. Like, it allowed me to, it kind of eased a little layer of like an unspoken layer of a power struggle within my marriage and in my household. It allowed me to ease deeper into my femininity and to more comfortably trust him to make the moves on our behalf. Because there was a time where it was like, what are you doing? How come you're doing it like that? Why do you do it like that? What's the thought behind the thought? Like, I was, again, being very analytical, trying to have a certain level of control over it. And now I'm just like, cool, I trust you. And not that trust is a soft feminine disregarded thing, but for me, in how it manifested in my life, it allowed me to move deeper into a space of trust, a space deeper into softness. And the thing that I actually found, surprisingly enough, is that I personally, for me in my life, no reflection upon anybody else, I enjoy the space of traditional gender roles. I enjoy the space of creating like turning a house into a home. I enjoy the space of supporting my husband. Now there are times where he'll tell me, babe, I don't need to hear any feedback. I'm not looking for advice. I just need to vent. Because, my mind, being the deeply analytical woman that I am, I'm like, okay, well, here's the move. And he'll be like, I'm not asking for that. I already made the move. The move is handled. I'm just sharing with you what went on. But the thing of it is within my business, it allowed me to make that transition over time to work with men. And there's a certain type of man that I find that when I move within the what's the word I want to use? When I move into the, I'm just going to word it like this, the Sharita-ness of my femininity, that allows me to be that safe harbor, to be that lighthouse on the beach or on the peak, drawing them in, to be the oasis where he can come, take a load off, rest, relax, gain clarity. Because again, if you've heard me say anything in the past, it's that desire is not a distraction, that desire is direction. To really tap into my zone of genius, which allows me to help him tap into his deeper layer of authenticity. And again, my zone of genius is really understanding where people are holding blocks. 9 times out of 10, 9.9 times out of 10, when I'm working with you and you're holding a block, you have some sort of mental or energetic block, I can feel it within my body. And there's been so many times where I'm talking with someone and I'm like, I feel it in here. And they're like, it does feel heavy on my chest. Or I'm like, I feel it in here. I feel it in here. I do want to say it, but I feel like I can't get it out. Like, I feel like it's caught in my throat. Like, there's so many times that happens. So it allows me to relax into my femininity without having to make all the decisions. One of the things that I found in this space, when I finally allowed myself to admit what I wanted, right? You got to allow yourself to want what you really want, was I like the space of working with that dominant alpha male type. I There's so many things I want to say about that, and I'm like, do I want to go there now? Let's go ahead and go there. I feel like I know. I hesitate because I don't want no smoke. And when I say I don't want no smoke, I don't want anybody coming for me, right? So I'm gonna say it, and if you choose to be triggered by it, just recognize that triggers are opportunities. Okay, that's what I'm gonna say. But what I genuinely believe is we do live in a space where emotional intelligence is very needed and necessary. Comma, however, just like I talked about going from one extreme to another, there are some extremes where this intelligence, this EQ has created a less comfortable or safe space for masculinity. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like there is a layer or a level of masculinity that is kind of under fire. And there are certain influencers in the world, which I think we can all think of three or four off the top of our heads, whether it's on, the TikTok and the YouTube influencers, where they've taken that masculinity to an extreme. And of course, then we now have that big term of that buzzword of toxic masculinity. But it unfortunately casts a shadow on masculinity as a whole. And I think that there is a beautiful space for that dominant alpha energy. I think that it is very necessary. It is very needed in the world. But again, everything within balance, and balance doesn't always mean equal, right? And so I am a advocate and a supporter of that beautiful masculine alpha energy. I think that it is necessary, and there is a reason why it exists. You know, and the same is true for every other type of energy. Okay, I'm not talking about the toxic masculinity. I'm not talking about the keep your woman stupid, barefoot, and pregnant masculinity. I'm talking about the recognizing that innate natural leadership is a thing. There are some of us, when we walk into a room, we dominate the room. And it's not because of anything that we've said or that we've done. It is a certain level of presence that we carry and that we bring into the room, into the space. And just like that dominant alpha energy is needed and appreciated from my perspective, the other energy types who don't necessarily fit that are also needed and appreciated. And it's not to say that every man needs to learn how to be an alpha male. I'm not saying that at all. And I even hesitate to define alpha masculinity because I don't think it's my place as a woman to define that. I think that's something where that we self-select and that we recognize within self. And there are some who honor it and who move with it. There are some, I've worked with some amazing alpha males who and I'm talking about in collaborations over the years, who didn't even recognize themselves as alpha males, but they just moved with force and didn't even recognize it. But they moved with a certain level of force. And when they walked in the room, before they even walked in the room would shut up in anticipation because they could feel it coming. Like that alpha energy, you can feel it. Okay. Even that submissive energy. And I'm not saying anyone who is alpha is submissive. I'm not saying that. Okay. I'm just giving extremes, right? But even that submissive energy, it's very much felt. It carries its own weight. It carries its own presence. But I do feel like there is a space where that alpha energy it's under fire because and this is just Sharita talking from my rooftop view. As the world grows and adapts into new ways of thinking and new clarity and new understanding, that alpha energy, it's kind of somewhat considered old school. And there are some spaces where that very traditional alpha energy, it does need to kind of catch up with the times. But there are other spaces where, again, if it wasn't here, like shit would not change, and change is a beautiful thing. So I'm going to leave it at that because, again, I don't want any smoke. I don't want anybody coming for me because they're offended by the alpha conversation. If you don't feel like that fits you, that is amazing for you. Okay. Like, disregard yourself from this conversation. If you do feel like it fits you, I think there is a very unique and delicious space for it. And one of the reasons why I want and desire and am led and called and attuned to that into that energy is because I tend to feel it and I know what happens when it's out of balance. It moves into that place of toxicity. And I'm talking about from a personal perspective and experience. It moves into a level of toxicity and it does bowl everyone over without that EQ. But when you can maintain that beautiful alpha energy and bring in that EQ, bring in the fullness of self and understand that usually the men that I work with in this space, and even I've noticed this in myself, there is a greater capacity for more. And when I say that, like, there are some people in the world, and I mean this in the again in the most positive way necessary, because I know how the internet likes to internet, right? So you got to kind of clarify everything these days. But there are some people in the world who are like, I would just be happy with $3 million, and that is it. Anything more is too much, right? And then there are those of us in the world who are like, I would be happy with $3 million today. Tomorrow, I'm going to need something more and something bigger, right? Like, I'm giving broad examples. Like, there are some people who just have a greater capacity for more. And it's not, and when that energy, that desirous space, that capacity is unfulfilled and unnurtured, it can sometimes move into that space of toxicity. It can move into that bowing people over. It can move into that space of greed and selfishness. But when it's honed in and nurtured and loved upon and given a place to self-express and to recognize what fuel it actually needs, not the surface level fuel, but that deep dwelling undercurrent of the well, then it moves into a very delicious space that is truly like a benefit to the world. Now, one thing I will tell you, I have three main guiding principles: authenticity, integrity, and sustainability. My personal motto is purpose plus passion equals profit, right? And I've talked about that in other chit chats, other videos, other happy hours, but so I'll go into that in another day. But my sole mission for what I'm doing within my work and with those alpha CEOs that I'm working with, when I say CEOs, I mean the decision makers, not necessarily just the CEOs or just the C-suite, but the decision makers, right? Is a space to create, to hone in and to nurture that alpha energy, because they do lead. They do lead with a natural level of force, whether they realize it or not. And in that space, to really hone and to nurture it, and to allow it space to blossom, bloom, to be clarified, to be led with that innate level of freedom and direction, because I do want a more equitable and sustainable world for us all. And there are people who are not alphas who are doing great things within the world. Absolutely. Like, let's not ignore that, right? Not everybody who is a leader is an alpha, and not all alphas are doing great things in the world, and vice versa, right? It goes in all directions. But what I am saying is, for those natural innate leaders who carry that bold, dominant alpha energy, because they are so innately influential, people follow them without even realizing they're following them. They wait for them to speak without even realizing they've paused their own thought to wait for them to speak. I want them to be in a whole, healthy, fulfilled space, so that as they lead intentionally and unintentionally, that they are leading in a way that is creating equitable and sustainability, or equitability and sustainability for us all. I don't want them in that space of greed and it's gimme, 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 mine, 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 right? I want them in that space of like, I want to do this because this is the legacy impact that I want to leave upon the world. Okay. Now, let me say that I have some very unique thoughts in reference to the financial aspect of that, because there are some people who are going to hear that and they're going to say, yeah, we need to cut CEO salaries. They're way too high. Listen, I don't have a dog in the race in that. I know enough to know that, and I'm going to say this, and you just take it with a grain of salt. There is no lack for money in this world. There, from the beginning of time, have always been haves and have-nots. Doesn't make it right. Doesn't make it wrong. Is it what it is? Absolutely. For my Abraham Hicks friends, I don't know if for those of you who are familiar with Abraham Hicks, Abraham talked about this in a lecture once, about how if all of the money in the world were gathered up and it was equally distributed amongst every person in this world, that within a matter of a few decades, we'd be back to where we are, because there are some who are gonna do, some who are gonna blow, and some who are gonna bury. I always think about this story from the Bible that I used to hear growing up, right? And I'm gonna relay it to you in the way that it was relayed to me as a kid, okay? And there was a story of this master who had three slaves, I guess. That was the word that was always used when I heard the story. And so we'll call them workers. And so he gave each of them talents. Now, as a kid, I perceived the word talents as money. And here's the thing, I'm not saying that my interpretation of this story is correct. I'm telling you just what my beliefs are, okay? You don't have to agree, you don't have to disagree. It is what it is. But what I am saying is that in the story, he gave three of the people, his underlings, talents. They each got equal amounts of talents. One person took his talents and he just blew it. Like, in my mind as a kid, I'm like, oh, he went to Vegas. You know what I mean? Like he just went and partied and he blew the money, whatever he did, or he made some bad investments. I don't know. Right. And then the second guy in my mind as a kid, the middle guy, he was so afraid that he was going to mess things up that he went and he buried his talents in the ground. Like he was like, I'm not losing my money. You got me messed up. Like it's going to be right here in this jar in the ground. Okay. That's what I'm doing with mine. And then the third individual or underling, he took his talents. And again, I'm interpreting this as a kid as money. And he went and invested it and he put 20 on 10 and you know what I mean? He flipped his money and it grew and it grew and it grew. And so when the master came back and he brought his three underlings together and he asked them what they did with their money, the first one kind of, as a kid, I'm imagining him turning his pockets inside out like, and the second one was like, I got all of mine, that everything you gave me is right here in this jar. Master, let me brush the dirt off. It's right here. It's all right here. And then the third one is like, yo, like, my pockets are overflowing because I went and I flipped this money and I turned it into. And so where am I going with this? Like Abraham Hicks talked about this, like in a matter of decades, if we equally distributed all the money, there's this likelihood that we'd be where we're at now because some are going to blow it. Some are going to bury it and sit on it. And others are going to invest it and they're going to grow it. And, some of it is in a matter of knowing what to do and not knowing what to do. But there's also a certain matter in how we tend to approach things and whether we're, this guy the third guy who went and he put 20 on 10 and he blew his money up. And again, I'm just like, I'm using phrases. All right. So just bear with me. But he went and he multiplied that money. It doesn't mean that he knew exactly what he was doing. It doesn't mean that he wasn't in a place of fear. It means that he went and did it. Right. And so I genuinely believe that we live in a time and age where 18-year-olds are becoming millionaires from YouTube videos. I mean, love them or hate them. What is it? Jake Paul and what's the brother? The two twins? What are their names? You know who I'm talking about. Okay, you know who I'm talking about. But we're talking about some OG YouTubers who have doubled down and got really good at their craft. And even if they're completely obnoxious and you love them or you hate their videos, like one of them is a billionaire right now. He's like a certified billionaire. No matter what you think about him, I'm not talking about him personally. What I'm talking about is we live in a time right now where anybody with a cell phone and an internet connection can earn a living, right? And can earn a delicious living at that. And when I say delicious profit, anytime you hear me say delicious profit or delicious living, I'm not just talking about like loads of money coming in. I'm talking about the kind of money that is like fun, the kind of money that you enjoy, like you had a blast doing, or that you got to do something that was completely authentic to you. Like it feels as good as it looks. Like we live in a time and age right now where delicious profit is not an unheard of thing, and that we all have an opportunity to do it. Now, I get that in things going on in the world, that's easier said than done for some, but it's not to say that it's impossible. Okay. So to wrap up that big thought, do CEOs need to lower their salaries? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have a dog in the race. I definitely tend to err on the side of being properly compensated for what they do. And I think sometimes, just as a little side personal note, that we as people, yes, there's ethical and in unethical ways to go about business, but I think sometimes we as consumers forget that the oftentimes, CEOs, they're they're beholden to shareholders, not necessarily to the consumer, right? And so sometimes they make decisions that align with the requirements that are set forth, or the desires rather, even, that are set forth by shareholders. So I don't want to go too much into that. I absolutely consider myself politically neutral. Um, I by the way, let me just say this: if you don't know this about me, I am absolutely an idealist. So I also am the type of person where I spent many years coaching in the woo woo spiritual realm. And one thing that, whether you believe in manifestation, law of attraction or not, don't care. One thing that I can tell you about me personally is that anything that I speak comes into existence. So I am extremely careful about my words, especially when I'm talking about myself and or things that I want to see. What energy flows where attention goes, right? And where that attention, whatever that attention goes to, it grows, intentionally or unintentionally. Like I'm a firm believer of that. So do with that as you will. But I started all of this. Let's take a quick little sip. I started all of this talking about, the best business advice I got was to play in the horror's energy, and somehow we ended up on, geopolitics. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. But what I will say is, um, there's a space sometimes where we have to go play in the wild, in the untamed. And when I'm working with my dominant alpha CEOs, what I tend to find are, these are the people who are already accustomed to playing in the wild, in the untamed. Like, it is the wild and the untamed is a natural space for them. The unchartered, right? There are some people who are like, cool, give me the roadmap on how to get there. And then there are people who are like, I don't even have a four-wheeler. I got some boots and in a dream or a passion or a desire. I'm gonna go pave my own way. There are those who dominate their way through. There are those who, you know, ease their way through. There's no right or wrong way of being. I genuinely believe that. But what I will say is, the people that I find that, if I'm being honest with myself, that I most enjoy working with are the people who know that they are worthy, who know that they are capable, and who at this juncture in time are just trying to figure out what their next move is. What is the evolution? What is the desire? What is the thought behind the thought that leads to the passion? Once I have that passion, what's the thought behind the thought that leads to the evolution of the purpose? And that's where that real sustainability comes in, right? Because again, it's got to be authentic to you. It's got to be in integrity. I absolutely will never work with someone who is completely out of integrity at every angle. But it's also got to be sustainable. And even within my own self, when I was creating my most recent intensives, the Prophet Rebellion, the Alpha Chamber, and coming soon, the Desire Diagnostic. Just throw that out there. One of the things that I had to recognize was, within my coaching business, traditional coaching, 3, 6, 9, 12-month packages. Like, I hate that. From a coaching aspect, I get bored with that. Like, I don't want to meet you for an hour and a half once a week, or once every other week, or whatever the time frame is over the next 6 months. Like, the men that I work with, they like and appreciate those quick results. They like and appreciate, like, let's dive in, let's figure this shit out, and let's keep it pushing. And I enjoy that space. Now, having said that, one thing that I've learned is, once we do our intensive, usually anywhere between 8-9 hours, and the Desire Diagnostic, that'll actually be a 24-hour coaching container intensive, where I'm happy to support you for the next several months. But a lot of times, again, that alpha energy that I work with, they want to go deep, they want to figure it out, and they have enough what's the word I want to use? And this is where sometimes I have to be careful because I'm starting to paint myself into a corner of the icky politeness that I talked about a while back. But I know how people are in these internet streets. So the alphas that I tend to work with, they're worthy. They know what they're capable of, and they're not afraid to go out and try something new. And I don't have to convince them that they're worthy. Sometimes it's just a matter of sussing out what the desire is and finding ways to layer that into their current business structure, into their current framework, so that it's not, oh my God, he's having a midlife crisis. It's really about tapping into that fullness of self, into not only the doingness but the beingness of your humanity. Excuse me. And in that space, your team, the people who you work with, your colleagues, even your family, when they can connect to you on that on that energetic level where they can tap into and feel your presence, it creates so much more trust. It creates so much more influence. It creates so much more unity. It creates so much more depth of consideration for the thoughts and the ideas and the ramifications of how things, what the implement, what's being implemented and how it's being implemented, the implementations, right, and the implications of it all. So there's a beautiful space when you can bring the fullness of self, and really tap into and understand what those desires are, where you can get a greater sense of direction, and you can bring that into your full self, and really make big moves within the world, by doing something as simple as being you. It's like I said, everything that I do, ultimately, it's that when I'm working with these leaders, that they're making decisions, even in their, whether they've got, they're in the C-suite of a large corporation, or they've got 10 employees, a business owner with 10 employees, or a solopreneur, that the moves that they're making, that they're impactful in a positive way that creates more equitability and sustainability for us all. I don't care what industry. The industries I do find I tend to work with most are oil and gas, tech, and finance. Especially my finance bros, because a lot of y'all came out of college making six figures, and now you are in a job that just has you stuck. And you're stuck because you have a beautiful paycheck, and to leave it would blow up your whole life. And you got kids in college, you got a big, beautiful mortgage, and you have a lifestyle to sustain, but you're stuck working 80 hours a week in something that is draining the fucking life out of you. Like that, I tend to run into to a lot of you. And I'm glad that I do. I'm glad that I do. I don't mean that in a like, "Ugh, I run into you." I'm like, ooh, I love running into you. So anyway, y'all, play in the horror's energy, whatever that means for you. For most people, it probably likely won't be within that sexual energy, but you get what I'm saying, right? I'm using it metaphorically, like play in the horror's energy and see where it takes you, and understand that clarity and that direction that it brings you might not be overnight. Like I said, for me, I knew pretty much right away within the first month or two, like what this extreme was bringing me and the reactions I was getting and how I perceived those reactions. On the surface, yes, it feels nice to be um desired, right? It feels nice to be wanted. It feels nice to have people vying for your attention. But beneath the surface level, it was icky, it was chaotic, and it wasn't actually what I wanted. It was not sustainable. And it was starting to move into like unethical territory, right? But as I played with that, and then I went to the other side of where I created those deeply, like I went into the analytical side and created like the Huntress and the Courtesan, those programs that I worked with women. It also wasn't satisfying. It was sustainable, or excuse me, it was in integrity, but it wasn't sustainable because it wasn't deeply satisfying to me. It was completely authentic to me, but it wasn't deeply satisfying. but it did allow me to tap into my feminine essence and to bring that to more women, to give them permission to tap deeper into their feminine essence. There's an old phrase, and it's something to the effect of like, behind every strong man is a good woman, or behind every good man is a strong woman, something to that effect. Like, it allowed me to tap deeper into that space, right? I don't have to be out front with my name on the billboard, but I am happy to stand beside you, and in certain cases, even behind you, and support you in what it is that you're doing in your endeavors of bringing more of your unique greatness into the world, whatever that is. So, on that note, let's go ahead and wrap it up. I want to say peace and love, family. By all means, any questions, any thoughts, any feelings, you are welcome to express them. Again, anything that I say is me riffing off the top of my head, and occasionally my words don't come out as I 100% intend. Okay, so I don't want anybody to come at me offended and feel in any kind of way. Just know that if I have triggered you, because trust me, I get triggered, right? I'm not above being triggered, but if I have triggered you, think of it as an opportunity, right? And if there's something that I'm saying or I'm doing that you love and you support, by all means, show your love and support. Drop a comment, drop a like. I will be posting these on YouTube at a certain point, so make sure you subscribe. And like I said, I'll keep you in the last video. I'll keep you posted on when the podcast launches. These will be going in there. But in the meantime, enjoy your beautiful day, evening, weekend, week, whatever it is that is upon you. I genuinely love you lots. Thank you for sharing this space with me. And yeah, I will see you